not this word order. So I'm going to argue that in Warrambori,
I worked that out with Emily before, and then I forgot up until now. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No worries. So if anyone's watching the recording, this the bit.ly address at the bottom of the slides, it's a place where you can go to download them if you want. Right, so Warrambori doesn't actually have this word order. It looks like it does. On the surface, it seems like it does. But if you actually look at the structure, I think there's a different internal structure. It's really just a lookalike. And this is due to massive restructuring through contact with a lot of other non-Austronesian languages that it is near. So if we look at the Austronesian family, this is a very simplified family tree. Apologies to any actual Austronesianists. But we can see Xwing is down here. It's a sister to Oceanic. And it's part of Eastern Malayo-Polynesian and includes languages such as Wamesa, which we'll talk about, and Biak and Taba. And there's about 42 languages, give or take, in this subgroup. If we look at a map, so this is Indonesia, we'll see that, and can you guys see my mouse when I'm moving it around on the screen here? Okay, great, so I'll keep using that to point. All right, so we see that the Xwing languages that we're talking about are spoken here in Papua and West Papua provinces in far eastern Indonesia. So this is the Bird's Head of Papua, this is Cendrawasih Bay, and the languages are spoken around here. There are more Xwing languages over here in Halmahera, but we're not going to talk about them. And if we zoom in on that area of West Papua, here's a map I made. So anything in green is either non-Austronesian or uninhabited. There's probably within the square something like 70 or 80 languages, but the green ones are all non-Austronesian. The dark orange ones are Xwing, so those are the ones we're interested in, and the sort of pale peachy ones are other Austronesian languages that are not part of Xwing. And if we look specifically at the languages that have this, what I'm calling NADQ word order, they're in red here. And so we see they're kind of spread out around Cendrawasih Bay. So here's Wamesa, spoken here. Dusner is, you can kind of see this little dot right here. This is Woi at the end of Yapen Island. And this is Warrambori up here at the Mamberamo River Delta. And if you're looking at scale, for those of you who have a sense of American geography, Cendrawasih Bay is about the size of Ohio. So that gives you sort of a sense of how big it is that we're looking at. So if we look back to Greenberg, 1966, in his Universal 20, he says that when any or all of the items, demonstrative, numeral, and descriptive adjective precede the noun, they are always found in that order. And if they follow, the word order is either the same or its exact opposite. Now, this is fairly vague. There's, what happens if some are before, some are after, it gets a little complicated, but it's very, very clear that we should really expect to see these three word orders. So again, I'm using Q for numerals so that I don't have two N's, it gets confusing. So demonstrative or determiner, numeral, adjective, noun, noun, determiner, numeral, adjective, or noun, adjective, numeral, determiner. Those three are expected to exist. And it pretty much explicitly rules out noun, adjective, determiner, numeral, this NADQ order. That said, it happens, right? I've just shown you, or I will show you with some data in a second, that it does happen at least 3 and possibly more times within Xwing, which is a group of about 42 languages. So how rare is it really? Well, Chinque and Dreyer have both looked at larger corpuses of languages. I think the most up-to-date one is probably Chinque's database. It's this ND one here. There's a link to it in my references if you download the slides. So he, at least as of about a year ago, had looked at almost 1,700 languages and finds that 105 of them, so just over 6%, have this NADQ word order that we're looking at. And they're across 30 plus families, and it's the 7th most common of the 24 logically possible word orders. So it's not vanishingly rare. There are maybe 2 or 3 word orders that appear to be completely unattested, but it's relatively low. And if we see that it only happens in about 6% of languages, right? That's a thing where when we see it, we do want to look for an explanation. If we compare these to the ones that Greenberg says should appear, we'll see that the 2 most common, so noun, adjective, NAQD is one we're going to see a lot. So that's something like coconut, big, 3, the. This appears in about 1/3 of languages. It's really, really common. DQAN, so the 3 big coconuts, English, right? It happens in about 1/5 of languages. And interestingly, the third one that he predicts, so that would be coconut the three big, only appears in about 4.4% of languages. It's actually rarer than NADQ, but he just happened to have one. I want to say it was Yoruba, but I could be wrong about that in his sample. So he predicted it. So again, not vanishingly rare, but uncommon enough that it's interesting when we see it. So some other NADQ languages here, we have sort of a cluster in what I would call the greater Papuasphere, so New Guinea and some of the other Melanesian islands. So we see a couple happening in Oceanic. We see it a bit in Trans-New Guinea, which is one of the giant families that is in New Guinea. And we see it elsewhere around the world. So in Africa, in North America, in Australia, in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, there's a few. So it is widespread geographically, even though there does seem to be this like New Guinea cluster going on. So let's look at some specific examples. So in Wamesa, which is the language I did my dissertation on and that most of my fieldwork has been on, it's very, very clear. It's exceptionless. Anytime you get, I mean, it's not very common, and you see this when you're looking for data. It's not very common to get a noun phrase with all of these things in it. You really sort of have to poke at it to get that out of speakers. But in Wamesa, it's exceptionless. So here we have Angaripi Masapatoru, so the three big coconuts. And it really is coconut big the three, very unambiguous in this case. If we look at Woi, which is a very close sister to Wamesa within the little Yapan group, Woi most of the time has this very, very common NAQD, so with the numeral before the determiner rather than after. This seems to be the default pattern in Woi. So you get Manu Baba Koru Wangpa, those two big houses, so house big to those. But there are specific situations that they're less common, but they do happen, where that numeral moves out to the other side of the determiner. So here you get the 2 days. I wasn't able to find any examples that had an adjective, but nonetheless, we can sort of assume that it stays in the same place. There's no evidence that it doesn't. So day the two. According to Nicholas Himmelman, who has worked on this a bit, in Woi, you tend to get these NADQ constructions. So with that final numeral, tend to be expressions of time, tend to be instances where you're sort of picking a subset out of a group. So, you know, two of them, instances of the pear story, right? Where you have this basket of pears and a bicycle and they fall all over the place and say, yeah, he picked up 3 of the pears. Then we've already talked about the pears. So it does happen in Woi. It's one of 2 possible orders. Dusner is a little bit tricky. Dusner is incredibly underdocumented. All we have is this 50-page sketch grammar by Dalrymple and Mofu. There, as of 2012, there were 3 elderly speakers left. I tried so hard to get in touch with one of them a few summers ago and was not able to do so. So we're really limited in our data for Dusner. But if you go through that sketch grammar, you can see noun, adjective, determiner. So the big dog is dog big the, naparomansaria. And we get noun, determiner, numeral, manvetatu yanuru, so the 2 birds of paradise. There are no examples with all 4 elements, but if we combine these 2, the most likely result is that it's probably NADQ. I can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I think it would be unlikely to be otherwise. And if we look at Warrambori, Warrambori is very different in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about that. But it also is basically the same situation as Dusner. All the data we have is another short Lingcom sketch from Mark Donoghue, but it looks like we have man big this, so NAD, and then NDQ, so birds the 3 for the 3 birds. So it appears to also be NADQ order. If we look elsewhere within Schwing, overwhelmingly NAQD, which is again that very, very common 30% of the world's languages. So for all of the Schwing languages for which there is data, which is a subset, it's this, what is this, 8 or 9 that I have on the screen out of the 42. For all of those for which there is data, other than the ones that I've already said have NADQ, they all have this very, very common word order. So I think it's very likely that this is reconstructible to Proto-Schwing. This is probably the ancestral form, and it changed in Wamesa, in Woi, in Duster, and sort of in Warrambori. There's this one corner case, which is Ron, which might have NQAD, which is also rare. I did the elicitation on Ron, and I will tell you, I don't trust it. So maybe, but definitely not NADQ there at least. So it looks like the inherited form, and the very common form here, as elsewhere in the world, has the numeral before the determiner rather than after it. And if we look at, this is a family tree of Schwing based on Dave Kamholtz's dissertation and some subsequent work that I've done on sound change. The languages in blue have the very common NAQD order, and the languages in slightly larger font in red are the ones we're interested that have NADQ. So we can see they really are fairly spread out. Again, Warrambori is up here. Waimesa and Woi, again, close sisters down here in Yapen. And Biak and Yapen, they're fairly closely related. So Dusner is a Biakic language. So we see them over here. And then the blue, the common ones are really everywhere. But widespread, geographically widespread genetically within the family. So I want to take a little detour and look at a language called Ambai. So Ambai is over here in blue. We'll see it's spoken in sort of a number of scattered villages along the south coast of Yapen Island over here. And Ambai has, again, this common NAQD, so numeral and then determiner order. But I think Ambai really gives us the key to show us how the reverse order has arisen in places like Waimesa and Woi. So Ambai is actually really nicely documented. Siltzer's dissertation from the early 1980s is a beautiful description of it. And so we can see in Ambai, very clear and ambiguous, we have the numeral before the determiner. So his two sore fingers is something like finger painful to the. And if we look a little bit deeper into the Ambai system, we'll see these suffixes. So fo is the determiner, and fo gets these number marking suffixes. So in the singular, it's e, as in waran fubafoi, the big wind. There's a dual, which is suru, so we win for suru, the two women. There's a trial, which is choru, so inontarai for choru, for the three people. And the plural is sa, so arikan itu fosa, the seven children. And so it's interesting that here we have, yes, the numerals. So this itu, for example, in arikan itu fosa and 12 is before the determiner, but we do have this number agreement marked after the determiner. And that's going to be really key for my argument here. So if we zoom in on just the dual and the trial, should have changed those example numbers. Oh well. We see, again, suru and choru are our dual and our trial. And if we look at the numerals of Ambai, which are similar to the numerals around Schwing, they're all inherited. These are fairly similar to just the numerals 2 and 3. So suru is the dual, ru is 2. I should add that in Ambai, as in many of these languages, ru never is going to appear on its own. It's always going to have a prefix which marks animacy. So it's boru if it's inanimate, and I believe mandu if it's animate or human. And toru just looks a whole lot like choru. Those are very easily confusable. So that's certainly not a coincidence. They probably evolved from the same place, but nonetheless, it is a synchronic fact about Ambai. Now, this is not true in the plural. So in the plural, you can have both a numeral like itu, 7 here, co-occurring with the plural. So in the plural, you can have a numeral and this number marking suffix co-occurring. But in the dual in the trial, you cannot. It is ungrammatical to have both the numeral and the suffix. So for 2, you can have fosuru, so determiner dual, or you can have boru, so the numeral fo, with no number marking on it. But you cannot have, for example, we win boru fosuru with that ru and the suru. That would be ungrammatical. Same thing in the trial. You can have inontorai fo choru with the trial. You can have ankati botoru. So bo and fo, once again, look very, very similar. I don't think this is a coincidence, followed by the fo, but you can't have both the numeral toru and this choru trial marker. They are in complementary distribution. Now, again, for those of you who have taught intro linguistics or you've taught intro phonology, what do we tell students when we see two things that look similar and they're in complementary distribution, right? Oh, they must be the same thing. They must come from the same underlying form. Well, my argument here is that that's exactly what speakers thought, right? These things look very similar. They never show up together. They must just be different realizations of the same thing. And, okay, so we have variable order. It can go before, it can go after. And in some languages, like Wa-Mesa and somewhat in Woi, they chose after as the default. So basically, I say that Proto-Yapin, the ancestor of Wa-Mesa and Woi, looked a lot like Ambai. So I've sort of swapped in Wa-Mesa words here from our example with the coconuts before, or sorry, people. So swapped in Wa-Mesa words here. So I think that before you probably had this same alternation of the numeral going before the determiner or the suffix going after the determiner, looking very similar. Speakers reanalyzed them as being the same thing with variable order, and then basically said, okay, yeah, we're going to go with the final one. We have to pick one, or maybe one was more common for whatever reason, more frequent, and they landed on post-determiner as the place for both of them as reanalysis. And we have exactly the same thing going on in Wa-Mesa, although it's a reduced system. So we have the singular marking E, which is exactly the same thing we just saw in Ambai, so the coconut, Angadipai. We have this plural marker C, Angadipasi, the coconuts. And if you want to say multiple, Angadipamwandu, Angadipatoru, Angadipaate. So you have no numeral before ever in Wa-Mesa, always numeral goes after. But we can never ever have both this plural marker and the numeral in Wa-Mesa co-occurring. That's completely ungrammatical. So you get to choose either put your numeral in that slot or you put your plural marker in that slot. In fact, if you're just saying, if you want to say the one coconut, Angadipa siri. So siri is the number for one, and you would have that bare determiner pa without that E. So it looks like from a syntactic point of view, and I'm not going to be drawing syntactic trees here, I'll leave that to the real syntacticians. But it looks like this suffix, this number marking suffix, and the numerals seem to sort of occupy the same slot in the tree, and that you can't have both. So again, it looks like your number agreement in your sort of step one of the change, the number agreement was reinterpreted as the numeral slot. It probably started in the dual trial because that's where they really resemble each other. Once you get up to higher numbers, they don't look the same at all. But if you're talking about things in the natural world, you're most likely, most frequently, probably going to be talking about 2s and 3s. This is going to be your most common. And so, if we start with that, make that change there, and then extend it by analogy to the rest of the numeral system to all of those higher numbers. So whereas before it would have been maybe just with the trial or just with the dual, we extend it to also say Rimne 5, even though it doesn't look anything like the plural. But at least it keeps the structure the same across all numbers, which not all languages do, but you can see how it would be a desirable thing for a language to do and a change that you might expect to happen. So let's talk about Dusner. So I said that Wa-Mesa and Woi both inherited it in this way and did the same reanalysis. In Dusner, this is just not a possible path of change. It must have been borrowed from Wa-Mesa. So as I'll show you, the development reanalysis of number agreement is just not available. But there is pervasive bilingualism. Dusner speakers speak Wa-Mesa. The 3 that remain are bilingual, and there is a long history of Wa-Mesa being spoken by Dusner people. It was a bit of a lingua franca in the area. And there's plenty of evidence for lexical and grammatical borrowing elsewhere. So this sort of fits within a larger pattern of contact. So if we look at Dusner determiners, we have the proximal ne, the distal ya, and the post-distal wa. They get prefixes, not suffixes. So there's no way for a suffix to be reanalyzed as numeral because there are no suffixes. If the affixes were being reanalyzed, it would keep that numeral before the determiner. So that's not possible. And if we look at the numerals in Dusner, they also just don't look anything like these affixes. I mean, there's the su for the dual to the ru in 2. So yes, but you're not going to see. I mean, that's not something that's going to confuse people. So we really can't pull on reanalysis as an explanation in Dusner. But if we look at the contact situation, so sort of zooming in on here, this is a map from Teo Karubui, who is a Wa-Mesa person in West Papua, who wrote his senior thesis on Wa-Mesa. So he made this map of all of the Wa-Mesa dialects. I mostly work on this red one along the coast. Dusner is spoken right here in one little village, Dusner village, right where that star is. So you can see it is really overwhelmed by Wamesa. Wamesa is the dominant language in the area. As I said, there's pervasive bilingualism. They're just surrounded by it, one village as opposed to a regional lingua franca, which is, Wamesa these days has about 6,000 to 8,000 speakers. For this area of the world, that's huge. Many languages have a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 or 2,000, a few villages. So Wamesa really is quite large and dominant in the area. And if we look at other examples of Dusner borrowing from Wamesa, so here's just a couple out of the lexicon. So Biak is Dusner's closest documented relative, which is why I'm putting it here for comparison. So Dusner and Biak are closely related. But we see the word for only. Wamesa has Wenasia, whereas Dusner has Wanas. Biak has unrelated forms. This form is limited, only Wamesa and Dusner have it. It's not found elsewhere. If we look at the verb for to pound, specifically sego, which is a staple food, we have Wamesa and Dusner have tar or tara, whereas Biak has nuk. This Biak form is the inherited Austronesian form. So this is not an innovation. These two, Wamesa and Dusner, have the innovation. And if we look at the word for many, which is of course relevant here, Wamesa and Dusner both have pau, which is found on many of the Yapen languages. Biak has bor, which is different. So Dusner, again, can't have inherited this in common with Wamesa because it isn't the Yapen language. It's closely related to Biak. And if we want to look in the grammar, for example, Wamesa and Dusner both have quinary decimal counting systems, which are innovated. So counting to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 plus 1, 5 plus 2, 5 plus 3, 5 plus 4, 10. So we find that in Wamesa and Dusner. We do not find that in Biak. Biak has the inherited decimal system, and those numbers are very easily shown to go back to Proto-Austronesian, just like the Ambai ones that we saw. So, you might be saying, well, okay, maybe Wamesa and Dusner both borrowed NADQ from, we know this is an incredibly linguistically diverse area. There are so many Papuan non-Austronesian languages around. Maybe they just borrowed it from the same place and it's not between the two of them. If we look at nearby non-Austronesian languages, again, totally underdocumented. So we can't prove that there wasn't a substrate language that, didn't have this NADQ order. But if we look at the ones that we do know something about, all of them, so according to Resync, like all other languages of the bird's head, Sugb, which is one of these languages, has this basic NAQD order in the noun phrase. So all of the surrounding languages that are documented well enough to know anything about have the numeral before the determiner, which is exactly the opposite of what we're looking for here in terms of borrowing. So it just looks like there's nowhere to borrow it from. Mansim and Mairasi, well, Mairasi is completely the wrong order. Mansim, that's compatible with NADQ, it's possible. But given what Resync says, and he has documented Mansim, given that Mansim is actually a bit of a ways away, I think it's very unlikely that that could be a source of borrowing for this. So we don't think they both borrowed it from somewhere else. We think Dusner really does have to have borrowed it from Wamesa. And I got a question last time I gave this talk about, well, what about quantifier float? Could that have sort of helped things along? And I think the answer is yes. I don't think it was a primary driver, especially because it's difficult to get back to what is the chronology here. I think it is probably relevant that all of the languages with NADQ have quantifiers that at least can, and in some cases are required to, appear later in the sentence than the determiner. So in Wamesa, we see this vura all appearing after the determiner. Tople spasivura simatitiotap, all the jars are smashed. In Moi, again, we see this many pau appearing after the determiner pa for many coconuts. In Moi, it can go before or after, just like the numeral can go before or after. And in Dusner, again, very, very limited data to be able to say this vor many here is actually a verb, or is at least being used predicatively as a verb in this case. But we know that at least can show up after the determiner, even if it is marked as a verb. So This may have been sort of an enabling factor. It may have been that the numerals moved out and then the quantifiers followed them. It's hard to sort of tease that apart, but it is a correlation here for sure. Now, not having NADQ order does not mean that you don't have late quantifiers. So Ambai that we saw, which has QD, does always have its quantifiers before the determiner. So FOW, many cognate with this POW that we've seen a couple times, does always appear before the determiner. But BIAC, which again is Dössner's closest relative, it's just, I mean, I have an extra slide at the end if you're curious. It puts its determiners all over the place. They can go before the NP, they can go after the NP, they can go after the verb, they can be the verb. So in this case, it shows kame all after this determiner ansia, but in BIAC it really can go anywhere. So if you have DQ, then you have at least the option of post-determiner quantifiers. If you have QD, you might have anything. So let's talk a little bit about Warrambori, which is the one that I said is just a lookalike. Warrambori, again, limited data, but it is weird. It was for a long time considered to be a non-Austronesian language. In fact, if you read Donohue's sketch grammar, he says it's a Papuan language. It's, you know, had heavy contact with Austronesian. We can see the influence, but it's not Austronesian. In the past 10 years, Donohue has reversed that position. And Dave Kemholtz in his dissertation has shown pretty clearly that Warrambori is indeed Austronesian, but it has undergone so much Papuan influence through such heavy contact that it can be really hard to tell. So, you know, if you look back to earlier examples, we've seen things are fairly morphologically simple, more or less. So here's two of my favorite examples from Warrambori. This is a polysynthetic language. So you lot have been shooting these pigs, one word. I saw some pigs in the jungle, one word. So we have all sorts of morphology going on here. It's just very, very different from the rest of Schwing. Again, if we look at its NP structure, so we have crocodile big 2. So again, we do appear to have the, in fact, in this case, this is not a numeral, this is a number agreement. So this is that same number agreement suffix we've seen, but here it's going on the adjective. So it goes in a slightly different place. In fact, it is before the determiner. So if we look at the birds, we see this plural marker showing up before the determiner. So different ordering on those agreement markers. And then we can see here for, of course, Zoom is covering up the beginning of that gloss for me, but there were 3 birds, I believe it is. Bird, the 3, we see the 3 appearing afterwards. So we see noun, adjective, number agreement, determiner, numeral. So again, slightly different order here. Now let's talk about Warrambori number marking. It has a plural and a dual, just like many of these other languages. The plural is probably an inherited form from Austronesian. It looks a lot like the Biakic plural. The dual is almost certainly an inherited form. This from Proto-Malayo-Polynesian duha, Proto-Schwing du for 2. And again, we've seen du or ru or similar things in many languages already, that D becomes R in some languages. So that's certainly inherited. The word for 4, wati, almost certainly comes from Proto-Malayo-Polynesian epat or Proto-Schwing pati. Then things start to get a little weird. Waiseno, it might be Austronesian. It's not the form you would expect, but I don't want to rule it out. The words for 2 and 3 are definitely innovated. Those are not inherited Austronesian forms. And when we get to the higher numbers, they are clearly borrowed. So once again, Warrambori has this quinary decimal system, which was definitely borrowed from a nearby non-Austronesian language. It's actually fairly common in the region and borrowed into Austronesian a couple times separately, independently, as we saw in Wamesa and Dössner. This word for 5 might be inherited, it might be borrowed. It looks a lot like rim, which would be the expected form, but it shouldn't have an initial R, and I don't know what's going on with that T, so maybe. And this word for 10 could go either way. It looks somewhat like samfor, which is the Biakic word for 10, But again, the sound changes are not quite what you'd expect. So this and 5, 5 and 10 might both have actually been borrowed in from Austronesian languages, which would explain why it doesn't have quite the right sound changes. But in any case, whatever's happening with those individual forms, we can see that there is just a lot of innovation, borrowing, restructuring going on in this entire number system, whether it's the agreement markers, this plural and dual, or whether it's the numerals themselves. So we know that there was a lot of borrowing going on here. We know that there was restructuring happening under contact. Now, Donahue goes ahead and says on page 26 of his grammar, the presence of an overt numeral in the NP does not require the use of the plural form of the noun. Indeed, this use is not grammatical. So it looks like what we have here is the same thing that we saw in Wamesa, the same thing we saw in Ambai, where the number and the number marker, so the numeral and the number marker, seem to be in complementary distribution, even if they don't resemble each other here. Nonetheless, you can't have both. So he gives this example, mani yave wanti, mani nayavi te buene. So you either get this 3 numeral or you get this plural marker na, but you're not going to get both. And notice that he glosses this bird the 3, not as the 3 birds, but as there were 3 birds. And this is going to be really important. So first he says quantifiers such as all cannot appear within the NP. They are only found predicatively. And the numerals are more natural if they appear as predicates. So what I'm going to argue is that, Donahue, I think, spent like a week or two with Warrenborry. So we just don't have that much depth and don't have that much information. And I would absolutely kill to spend a month with a Warrenborry speaker. That's high on my to-do list if I can ever get back to that part of the world. But I'm going to argue that the numerals really are predicates, that they're not inside the NP. They follow the determiner because they are outside of the NP. So here's some examples with quantification. So he gives this example of the 3 birds hid with this 1T and says, it's not straight up ungrammatical, but it's awkward. It's sort of a question mark. They don't like it. But you can say there were 3 birds where that 3 really is acting as the predicate, even though it's not getting subject agreement. Or here is sort of another more natural way to say things is the birds that hid, there were 3. Mani nao te buene wanti. So we really do, it seems like we much prefer to have this numeral be a predicate. So I'm arguing that this is not NADQ because it's not part of the noun phrase, that the numeral really is outside of that. It's a predicate. It's, whether you want to call it a verb or whatever you want to do there. So in Warrenborry, I think that earlier forms of the language had NAQD, which is the inherited Schwing form. It had inherited Austronesian numerals. And then Papua happened to it. And the sort of normal thing that happens there is massive contact and everybody's swapping words and grammar and sound and all of that. And we see this everywhere in the region. So massive contact-induced restructuring of the numeral system. And so now in modern Warrenborry, tentatively, quantifiers are predicative only. So we get NAD and then the predicate, which is your numeral. Which means that Warrenborry isn't really NADQ. It looks like it. If you have a beads on a strings syntax theory of syntax, maybe. But again, once we start looking at the higher structures, I don't think we can really support it, or at least we would need a lot more data. So takeaways here. NADQ word order. It's cross-linguistically uncommon. It only happens in just over 6% of languages across the world. That it can arise and did arise in at least 2 Schwing languages via the reinterpretation of number agreement markers. So in Wamesa and Woi, they saw these suffixes, they look like numerals. They said, okay, those are numerals now. It can be borrowed. So Wamesa into Dusner through, again, heavy contact, a lot of sort of prestige relationships, those sorts of things, but it is a borrowable thing. And finally, the Warrenborry gained a surface similar pattern through contact, through restructuring, but it is not an actual example of that word order. So thanks very much, and I'm happy to take questions. And I'm going to open up the chat here so I can see if anybody types something in, but let me know if I miss. Oh no, it's hidden. Sorry.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you looked at ellipses, or have any other people looked at ellipses in the noun phrase? I'm just sort of wondering what it would look like. Like I like the two, or
I don't believe I've seen any
coconuts, the
data.
two. So that might tell you something about, especially say if you compare like one of the NAQD languages and with the NADQ languages, and see if how do they do it? Can they, drop the, say, the noun and the adjective and leave just a stranding quantifier and a determiner?
I don't think I've seen any data on that. It's possible there might be something on Woi that I just don't remember seeing. Basically, the languages where you might actually have the data would be, I know I haven't looked at it in Wamesa. It might show up in Woi, Anbai, or Biak, but I would have to look back at those dissertations. Let's see. So I know in Wamesa, at least, you can definitely drop the head noun and just use the determiner instead. So, I mean, I guess that's a similar thing. I haven't seen that. I would expect to say, I saw the two. I would expect to see something like I saw Pamwandu, but I would have to double check that. Yeah, but that's a really good question.
You offered an extra slide, and I think I was intrigued by the determiners as different parts of speech that you mentioned. Was that in Biak?
Oh, the quantifiers as different parts of speech.
Oh, it was quantifiers. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the predicative thing that you were.
Yeah. So
did you have more on that?
Oh, do I? Yeah, so the determiners are interesting. Most languages have three. So in general, it's a proximal, a medial, and a distal, although Woi also works in some like height distinctions in there. In Wamesa, they are clitics that get affixes on them, which is cool in its own way. So you get like noun clitic suffix, but the suffix attaches to the clitic. It's not like attaching to the noun. But yeah, so if we want to look at, let's see, okay. So here's some more examples of Wamesa quantifiers. So here's Vura. This is the example I gave you before, coming directly after the determiner. I have a couple examples where it comes actually after the verb. So it can sort of float even farther rightwards. So this is dog, the, red, all, where red is a stative verb in Wamesa. And in Wamesa, as in many of these languages, many parts of speech can just act as verbs. So here, this pau, the gnats are many, which is often a true statement in West Papua. So the gnats, three plural, non-human, subject agreement prefix, many. So many is really a verb in this case. So there are many, or they are many. But the quantifier can never precede the determiner, though it can move to various places sort of after it. If we look at Woi, it can go before the determiner. So here's that pau again. So many, the. It can go after. So here's the example I showed you before. So coconut, the, many, or not. Here, this quira, all. You see it happening after the verb. So these are pro-drop languages. So the subject is dropped. They too stay, all. So they both. And then we see here again, many acting like a verb. So the frogs are very many. It's Mantang, this emphasis. So three plural subject agreement here with the many. In Dusner, again, very, very limited data, but we see here's an all, which shows up after the verb. Here's many acting as the verb. And here's many. This is an interesting case. it's kind of long and complicated. He said to me, he said, there are so many things, or so many things that are many here. Is there a boat? So thing, relative many, the. So this many is the verb. It is the verb in a relative clause. This they is the relative marker. And relative clauses in most of these languages go in between the noun and the determiner. So even though it's a verb, you're getting it showing up inside the noun phrase, but that's only because it's in a relative clause. And then just some biak because it's super cool. Like, you know, it can go after the determiner, which is I think the one I showed you in this kame. So fish, the other, the, all, they agree. It can go directly after, it can go at the end of the sentence. So this all, this come here is modifying the subject of a company, which again, pro-drop language, so it's not showing up. So it's like, we all, and then third singular him, but it's moved all the way to the end, even though, you know, it sort of semantically goes up here. And then here it's third singular all, so all of it, but it's preceding this third singular pronoun, even though, so yeah, biak just lets them go anywhere. And biak, again, the word for many is always a verb. Yeah, all of these things can happen.
You said at one point that you're leaving the actual drawing trees to syntacticians. Have you not? I'm sure you still you have attempted, right, to analyze the sort of exact structure and derivation.
I can tell you, I've looked at what Cinque has. So this is what Cinque proposes with Wamesa words put in. So he has this sort of very complicated multi-layer tree, basically where you start out underlyingly with essentially the English order, the three big coconuts. And then you have coconut raising past big, and then you have the whole coconut big pied piping up the tree, past three, past the, and then staying there. So he says that this is an unusual order because it involves you start by pied piping, and then you sort of stop. Right, you don't pick up the three as you go. You don't pick up the as you go. So this is sort of what I have in terms of a syntactic analysis. I think a lot of it is going to depend on a lot of, you know, do you want NPs or DPs? Where are things landing? I've sort of chatted with Byron On, who is a real syntactician, and he got very excited about, you know, what might be going on. I'll say I do theoretical phonology. Theoretical syntax is a little bit outside of what I feel equipped to really make an argument about. But I do think it's an interesting problem if anybody else wants to take it up.
Yeah, it is an interesting problem. Yeah, and the story of how this word order came about sounds, you know, ever so plausible, right? That it's the agreement which has been reanalyzed.
And one of the cool things too is that while Mesa, at least, it has dual in the subject agreement. So your subject agreement markers, there's singular, there's dual, and there's plural. There's kind of a trial. There are trial pronouns, but they're morphologically totally transparent, and they just get plural marking on the verb. So I don't want to say that they're sort of real in any sense. But Wamesa definitely has dual in its grammatical system. It does not have a dual suffix on the determiner. It just says singular, plural. So I do think that probably as part of that reanalysis, that the dual probably looked a lot like the number 2 and just completely dropped out. They might have lost that, they lost it entirely. And now if you want to say the 2 coconuts, you do just have to use the word 2. Potentially the same thing with the trial. You know, we saw the trial in Ambai, we see the trial in some other Yapen languages, though not all. You know, it could be that Wamesa once had that 2 and it dropped out again when the numerals sort of replaced it.
I guess I'm sort of curious, I mean, like, if it's reanalysis with that sort of tree going on, or even if it's, a much simpler order that just has these heads in weird spots, it seems really, it seems like that would be really marked. So I guess I'm surprised that Dusner would borrow that, compared to, all the lexical items and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show that if you have enough contact and enough bilingualism, you can borrow anything. But you're right that it's unusual, and it would have been a big change for them, I would think. So yeah, it is surprising, and I think it probably just speaks to sort of the intensity of the contact and the extent of the bilingualism. And I don't know, we don't know much about the prehistory of these languages. They're deeply understudied in a place where there's no written records other than a couple of Europeans and only very few of them. So, it's possible that there was an influx of Wamesa speakers learning Dusner, perhaps maybe moving into the village, intermarriage, something like that. And that might have contributed to the restructuring because they would have maybe kept their Wamesa ordering rather than making Dusner speakers be the instigators of that change. But that's really pure speculation at this point.
You also sort of, if I've got this the right way around, Wamesa is really pervasive, I think was the word that you used in the area anyway, right? Is it kind of more, is it considered more prestigious than some of the other languages that are spoken in that area? So if it has that kind of social power, I mean, there's no obvious reason actually, really, when you look at the entire linguistic picture, that you go towards the simpler option, right? So if Wamesa is more prestigious, and then to sort of become more Wamesa-like is going to add to that in your language, then that also makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And it's kind of interesting because when people talk about that region, they think of Biak as the lingua franca. The Biak are they are not just in that bay, but they've also spread out to the Raja Ampat Islands. They're really active traders. They, were involved in the slave trade and the spice trade with farther west in Indonesia, over the last couple of 100 years. And so they're sort of the top of the totem pole, and Biak is a very widespread lingua franca. But then when you go more locally, then you get Wamesa as the more local lingua franca, and then you get these more local tiny languages like Dusner. And I think there absolutely is a prestige differential there. In addition to just, everyone is talking to everyone is intermarrying with everyone. There's sort of this long-standing multilingualism, intermixing of people. So I think, yes, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I should also apologise. I'm so sorry that I had to sort of run away right at the end there. And
Oh, no worries.
So I also have just a sort of that's interesting question, which you may have covered. But when you said that the quantifiers can be the verb, if you like, in the sense that they can carry the verbal inflection, I just wondered what exactly do those kind of utterances mean, if you like? How would we translate them maybe into English when you have the verbal inflection on the quantifier?
They don't literally translate very well into English. So I would say something like, if I were being very literal, I would say the gnats are many. I think it's really there are many X. It's interesting, you can also do it with the numerals, but you need to add this verbalizing prefix ve. So let me see if I can just type on this slide. Yeah, that should work. So if you wanted to say there are 4 gnats, you would say something like aparapiri, maybe pasi, si, ve, I said 4, ate. So this is gnat, the plural. That si is the third person non-human plural. Ve is a verbalizer, and ate is the numeral 4. So the gnats are 4, or there are 4 gnats. So you can do that very productively with this ve prefix. With the quantifiers, you don't need it. They can just sort of zero convert, but I would translate it similarly. There are quantifier things.
Kind of an existential.
Yeah.
Essentially. Cool.
Almost conceptualizing the verbalizer as ing, so the gnats are for ing, they are being for. Is that sort of a way to think about it?
So it's not really a verbalizer. I call it an essive, and one of the things it does is verbalize, but it really means sort of to have the properties of. So if I say like, I got this great example where there was a tree that had lots of oranges on it. I think it was like a, some sort of elicitation prompt. And instead of saying like, that's an orange tree, or the tree has oranges, the person said, the tree they oranges. So meaning like the tree has the properties of oranges. It's an orange tree, it's fruiting, whatever. And so you can stick they on all sorts of things. It also marks the relative clauses. It also means to become. In other related languages, it can mean to have, it can be a to, it can be all sorts of stuff. David Gill has a great paper on multifunctionality in they. But in Wamesa in particular, it basically takes the root and attributes some attributes of that root to whatever the subject is.
I'm just thinking of David Gill's work exactly, and this is just a beautiful example of what he's sort of expounded upon, this kind of, don't take Latin and the structures of Latin and that which is in Latin to be the kind of underlying structure necessarily for everything. So this just seems like a really nice example of it.
Yeah, it's I believe it's a 2017 paper in a special issue of NUSA. I've also got a paper on Wamesa in there. I definitely recommend it if you're into that stuff. It's long, but it's really cool.
Thank you.
So I have a question that is specifically, so I'm not sure if Dan told you this coming in, but my students in my research methods class are supposed to attend these seminar talks. And this is their very first one. It's the first week of class. We actually haven't even had class yet. And so I assume that they're just a little shy and that they haven't come up with questions to ask because this is all just being thrown at them. So I'm going to ask a question for them. In your work, when you go to Papua New Guinea or when you are eliciting data, what is the thought process so let's say you've noticed that you're missing some data, like so in the languages, I forget which one you were saying that you would kill to have a couple weeks with.
All of them, but yeah.
So the next time you go back, what's your thought process for designing elicitation materials to fill in those gaps? And specifically related to the data that we've got here, just for that anchor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have so many open questions on Wamesa, even though I worked on it for 10 years, and really every other language of the area, they're so underdocumented. And even if you think something is really well documented, when you go in to look at a particular thing, there's always like, oh, I really want that one thing, and they didn't publish it. I don't know what's in their archives. I try to think of sort of the equivalent of a minimal pair, I guess would be the way to put it. So if I wanted to find out about ellipsis in Wamesa, for example, I would try to think of, okay, what's a situation where you want to say the full noun phrase, and we're going to start with that. So maybe it's translating something that I've said. Ideally, I can get it from them without a translation, because then you don't have to worry about those sorts of interference effects. So maybe it's describing a picture or describing a video. And then I think, okay, how can I try to get them to say the construction that I'm hoping for? So depending, I had the most wonderful consultant. She was a second grade teacher, so she was just endlessly patient with me and willing to repeat herself a million times and answer ridiculous questions. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago. But with her, at least, I could say, okay, what if you leave that out? Is that a word? Is that a sentence that you could say? Would that make sense? Maybe I'm going to try it. Does this construction work? Is that a good sentence, or do I sound ridiculous? And at least we were comfortable enough with each other that she was willing to say, no, Emily. She would say, lucu, itu lucu, which means that's funny. She would never tell me I was wrong, but she would tell me it was funny. And so, you have to have a relationship with your consultant, because often when you suggest ungrammatical things, sometimes people are too polite and they don't want to tell you that you're wrong. So you have to sort of know whether that's an issue or not. So, if I were approaching Warrambori, I have so many questions about Warrambori. But I would say, how do you say 2 coconuts? How do you say big coconuts? How do you say 2 big coconuts? How do you say those 2 big coconuts? Okay, you know, if I move these words around, would you accept that? You know, can you describe this picture? Can you describe this picture? Can you describe this picture? And if they don't get fed up and give up on you, then hopefully that gives you enough contrasting forms so you can see sort of what the range is, what they'll accept, what they won't accept, and, you know, see the same way you would sort of look for the kinds of sentences in English to demonstrate some sort of syntactic or whatever sort of phenomenon, trying to get those out of somebody. You know, it can be very hard because they, especially if they're not linguists, which none of my consultants are. But, you know, think about what sort of contrast do you need to demonstrate, and can you get people to either say those or accept you saying those in a way that you believe, if that makes any sense. It's nice with inflections and with phonology. So there's some really cool phonological stuff going on here that you see in basically conjugated verbs where the 2 morphemes come together. And so, you know, I have sat down with probably 10 languages in the area right now and just said, okay, you know, the word for paddle, how do you say I paddle, you paddle, he paddles, they paddle, you know, and go through the whole paradigm. And at least with that, you know, it's pretty straightforward. It's much harder with syntactic things because it's more open to suggestion, whereas like they're probably going to pronounce they paddle correctly, right?
Any other questions for Emily? All right. Well, thank you for taking time out of the middle of your day, breakfast time, to speak with us.
I got out of office hours. It was great. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. And again, you know, I'll put up my final slide, but you know, feel free to email me if you have any questions, or if you go to, again, that link on the bottom of the screen, you can download these slides and sort of poke at them more in your free time if you want. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming and for your great questions.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
Thank you very much.